The low evening sun glinted off the polished windows of Manhattan's skyline, painting the city in hues of amber and gold. Gabriella Russo stood at her small Brooklyn apartment window, watching as the light transformed the urban landscape into something almost magical. The contrast was not lost on her. The magnificent view from this modest window versus the opulent vistas she had grown up with. She turned away from the window and caught her reflection in the mirror hanging on the wall of her sparsely furnished apartment. 30 years old with deep, contemplative brown eyes that had seen more of the world than most diplomats twice her age. Her dark hair fell in natural waves around a face that could shift from striking to unremarkable with just a change in posture. Right now, as she stood in her small apartment, she looked like any other New Yorker finishing a long day. On her dresser sat a Cartier watch enclosed in a velvet-lined box. The timepiece was old, the leather strap worn from years of use. It had belonged to her father, Ambassador Victor Russo, and remained the one possession she hadn't been able to leave behind when she'd walked away from her previous life 6 months ago. Gabriella ran her fingers lightly over the watch face before closing the box. Time had always been important in the Russo household. Time for meetings, time for decisions that affected nations, time that shaped the world in small but significant ways. Now time belonged to her alone. She opened her closet and pushed aside her regular clothes to reveal the crisp black uniform of Monarch's, the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan. The starched fabric felt stiff under her fingers, so different from the designer silks and cashmeres that once filled her wardrobe. She changed quickly, transforming herself from Gabriella Russo into Ella, the supremely efficient waitress, who could balance a tray of beluga caviar with one hand while pouring century-old scotch with the other. The television hummed quietly in the background, providing white noise as she dressed. But a familiar name cut through her concentration, making her turn toward the screen with startled attention. Ambassador Victor Russo arrived in New York today ahead of negotiations for the historic Qatar energy deal valued at over $20 billion. The agreement, which could reshape global energy markets, has faced several challenges in recent months. Ella froze, staring at the familiar face of her father on the screen. At 65, Ambassador Victor Russo remained an imposing figure with his silver hair and penetrating gaze. Even through the television, his presence filled the room. She had not seen him in person since leaving a carefully worded note on his desk 6 months ago, severing ties with the only world she had ever known. Memories cascaded through her mind, growing up in embassies across the world: Cairo, Riyadh, Dubai. Her childhood had been an education in power diplomacy and the complex dance of international relations. She remembered sitting with her father in the study of their Riyadh residence when she was 10 years old. The ornate Cartier watch sat on the desk between them as he taught her Arabic, his voice patient but demanding perfection. "Language is not just about communication, Gabriella," he had said, tapping the watch face. "It is about time and patience. Every word must be precisely chosen, just as every second must be accounted for. This is how the world works." She had learned Arabic flawlessly, then French, Italian, eventually 7 languages in total, each one a key to a different realm of power and influence. Languages that would serve her well in the diplomatic career her father had mapped out for her since birth, a career she had rejected. A knock at the door pulled her from her memories. She opened it to find Bill Anderson, her 70-year-old neighbor, holding a container of homemade stew. The former Army colonel had taken a grandfatherly interest in her since she'd moved in. "Thought you might need some real food before your shift," he said, his weathered face crinkling into a smile. "You work too hard, Ella." She accepted the container with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Bill. You're keeping me alive with these meals." Bill's sharp eyes studied her face. "You look troubled. Bad news." Ella glanced back at the television, now showing a commercial. "Just saw my father on the news. He's in town." "Ah." Bill nodded, understanding immediately. He was one of the few people who knew her real identity, having recognized her name from his military intelligence days. "The Qatar deal. Big business. Bigger politics." "Yes," she sighed, placing the stew in her small refrigerator. $20 billion and a potential shift in global energy policy. Just another day at the office for Ambassador Russo. "You miss it?" Bill asked quietly. Ella considered the question, her hands smoothing her waitress uniform. "I miss parts of it, the languages, the cultures, the feeling that what you're doing matters." She shook her head. But I don't miss being Victor Russo's daughter instead of my own person. Every word I said, every action I took reflected on him. I was never just Gabriella. I was the ambassador's daughter. Bill nodded thoughtfully. Freedom comes with a price. So does identity. Worth every penny, she replied with a small smile. I better go. Can't be late. As she gathered her purse, Bill added casually, you know, someday you'll have to stop running from who you are by pretending to be someone you're not. She paused at the door. I'm not pretending, Bill. For the first time, I'm finding out who I really am. He smiled knowingly. The world has a way of finding us no matter where we hide. His words followed her down the stairs and into the cool evening air, an unsettling prophecy she couldn't quite shake. Miles away in the gleaming tower that bore his name, Marcus Sterling stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office on the 70th floor. At 45, he commanded a business empire that spanned continents. His silver-streaked dark hair and penetrating gray eyes complemented the perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit that hung impeccably on his tall frame. Everything about him exuded power. He watched the sun setting over Manhattan with the detached appreciation of a man who had long since stopped seeing beauty for its own sake. Instead, he saw assets, investments, opportunities. The city sprawled below him like a complex circuit board of potential profit and loss. Behind him, the executive boardroom had fallen silent. 6 senior executives sat frozen around the massive table, watching their CEO with the wary attention of prey animals sensing a predator. Marcus turned slowly from the window, his expression dangerously calm. Explain to me again, he said, his voice quiet but carrying an undercurrent of steel, why our intelligence on the Qatar negotiations is suddenly incomplete. Sarah Mitchell, his 40-year-old PR director, spoke first, her composure remarkable under his piercing gaze. Ambassador Russo made some unexpected changes to the terms yesterday. Our contact at the State Department couldn't get specifics. Marcus rested his hands on the back of his chair, his knuckles whitening slightly. $20 billion, 2 years of preparation, and now at the crucial moment we're blind because Victor Russo decided to change the game. His voice remained level, which made his anger all the more intimidating. Perhaps we should consider approaching the ambassador directly, suggested David Wang, the company's legal director. A formal meeting between principals might. Victor Russo doesn't take meetings with people he considers enemies. Marcus cut him off. And he's considered me an enemy for 20 years. The room fell silent again. The executives exchanged glances, aware they were witnessing something rare, a glimpse into Marcus Sterling's closely guarded personal history. Catherine Morgan, the CFO, broke the silence. What about Hassan Al-Farsi? He has a relationship with both sides. Could he function as an intermediary? Marcus considered this, his expression unreadable. Hassan is already in New York. We're having dinner tonight at Monarch's to discuss strategy. He looked at his watch. You all have 48 hours to get me the information I need. This deal will not slip through our fingers. Not because of Victor Russo. Not again. The dismissal was clear. The executives gathered their materials and filed out quickly, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts in the darkening Manhattan skyline. Once alone, Marcus allowed himself a moment of unguarded emotion. His jaw tightened as memories surfaced of a younger Victor Russo, not the silver-haired diplomat, but the man who had once been like a brother to him, the man who had betrayed him. He walked to his private office adjoining the boardroom. Unlike the minimalist modernity of the corporate spaces, his personal office contained touches of warmth, leather-bound books, a vintage chess set in a single silver frame on his desk. The photograph showed a much younger Marcus with a beautiful dark-haired woman and a small boy with serious eyes. Sarah and David, his wife and son. Sarah had been gone for 15 years now, taken by cancer. David, now 25, might as well be gone too, studying in Europe and speaking to his father only when absolutely necessary. Marcus touched the frame lightly, remembering Sarah's voice during those early struggling years of building his company. I believe you'll succeed, Marcus, she had said, even as the illness began to claim her. But promise me you won't lose yourself along the way. Had he kept that promise, the answer hung in the silence of the empty office. His phone rang, interrupting his rare moment of introspection. The screen displayed Hassan Al-Farsi's name. Hassan Al. He answered, his business persona sliding back into place seamlessly. Marcus, my friend. Hassan's cultured voice carried the subtle accent of his Qatari heritage. I hope I find you well this evening. As well as can be expected with Russo throwing obstacles in our path. There was a pause before Hassan responded. That is partly why I called. There have been some concerns expressed by our principals about the terms you proposed last week. Marcus felt his jaw tighten again. What concerns specifically? They feel that the environmental impact assessments were inadequate. Ambassador Russo presented some compelling alternative data. Of course he did, Marcus said coldly. Russo has been trying to sabotage my business ventures for 2 decades. This is nothing new. Hassan's voice remained calm. Perhaps, but the concerns raised are legitimate, Marcus. The technology has implications beyond profit margins. We can discuss this tonight. I'll have answers for every concern. I look forward to it, Hassan replied, though I might suggest approaching this with an open mind, old friend. Not everything is a personal vendetta. After ending the call, Marcus stood at the window again, his reflection superimposed over the city lights now glittering in the darkness. The mention of Victor Russo had unearthed something he rarely allowed himself to remember. 20 years ago, a betrayal that cost him his first company. And later, when Sarah fell ill and needed specialized treatment, his desperate request for help met with silence from the man who had once been like family. Sarah had died 3 months later. Marcus opened his desk drawer and removed a small item, an antique pocket watch that had belonged to his own father. He rarely looked at it now, but tonight he held it in his palm, feeling its weight. You were right about Russo, he murmured to Sarah's photograph. I should have listened. His intercom buzzed. Your car is ready, Mr. Sterling. He returned the watch to the drawer, straightened his tie, and headed for the elevator. Tonight was business. Tonight was strategy. Tonight was another step in the long game he had been playing against Victor Russo for 20 years. Tonight he had no idea his world was about to collide with another in ways he could never anticipate. Monarch's restaurant occupied the entire penthouse floor of a historic Art Deco building in Midtown Manhattan. Its reputation for discretion and excellence made it the preferred dining establishment for the genuine power brokers of New York. Not those who sought the spotlight, but those who moved in the shadows behind it. The interior was a study in understated luxury. No flash, no ostentation. Just impeccable materials, perfect lighting, and acoustics carefully designed to ensure that conversations remained private even in the open dining room. The clientele didn't come to Monarchs to be seen. They came to see each other, to make decisions that would never appear in any newspaper, to cement alliances over perfectly prepared Dover sole and vintage Bordeaux. Robert Thompson had managed Monarchs for 30 years, serving presidents, prime ministers, and potentates with the same unflappable British courtesy. At 60, his silver hair and aristocratic bearing gave him the appearance of a distinguished statesman rather than a restaurant manager. But his true talent lay in observation. He missed nothing and remembered everything, which was why Ella had intrigued him from the moment she applied for a position 6 months ago. He watched her now as she prepared for the evening service, her movements precise and economical as she polished already gleaming crystal glasses. There was something in her posture, in the way she held herself, that spoke of a different world than the one she claimed to come from. Her resume had been sparse, a few catering, some graduate studies in international relations. Nothing that explained the unconscious grace with which she navigated the rarefied air of Monarchs. You have the Sterling table tonight, he informed her, approaching with his leather-bound reservation book. Table 12, Mr. Sterling and Mr. Al-Farsi. If he had expected a reaction to these prominent names, he was disappointed. Ella simply nodded. Any particular preferences I should be aware of? Mr. Sterling prefers the Macallan 25 one large ice cube. Mr. Al-Farsi doesn't drink alcohol, but enjoys our house-made pomegranate seltzer. Thompson studied her for a moment. Sterling can be demanding. If he becomes difficult, signal me. Ella smiled slightly. I've handled difficult customers before, Mr. Thompson. Not like Marcus Sterling, he replied quietly. The man wields his power like others wield knives. As Thompson moved away, Lisa Robinson, a veteran server with 2 decades at Monarchs, sidled up to Ella. At 40, Lisa had seen the rise and fall of countless power players across her tables. Sterling's a nightmare, she whispered. Last time he was here, he made Jennifer cry because his steak was medium well instead of medium rare. I'll be careful, Elna assured her. It's not just that. Lisa continued, checking to make sure Thompson wasn't within earshot. I keep a little book on all our regulars. Sterling's got a reputation for using foreign languages to talk about people right in front of them. He speaks 5 or 6 fluently, thinks it's amusing to insult people who can't understand him. Ella felt a small smile form on her lips. That does seem rude. Just warning you, the man's brilliant but cruel. Old money types hate him because he came from nothing and he hates them right back. The only person he seems to genuinely respect is Hassan al-Farsi. Across the restaurant, James Turner, an ambitious 28-year-old server with slicked back hair and eager eyes, was arranging flowers at another table. He glanced over at Ella with barely disguised envy. Don't know why Thompson gave you the Sterling table, he muttered as she passed. I've been here 3 years, you've been here 6 months. Perhaps because I don't hover over the guests trying to hear their conversations, Ella replied mildly. James flushed. I'm networking. You should try it sometime. These people could change our lives if we play it right. Ella didn't respond. James wouldn't understand that she had spent her entire life in rooms with powerful people, that she had fled precisely to escape that world, not to chase it across white tablecloths. The maitre d's voice came through their earpieces. Mr. Sterling and Mr. Al-Farsi arriving. The front-of-house staff subtly straightened a collective intake of breath that signaled the arrival of true power. Ella moved to her position, watching as Marcus Sterling entered the dining room. He moved with the confident grace of a predator, his eyes taking in the room with one sweeping glance that seemed to catalog every person, every detail. Beside him walked Hassan al-Farsi, a distinguished man in his 50s with salt and pepper beard and thoughtful eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses. Thompson appeared immediately, greeting them with perfect deference. Mr. Sterling, Mr. Al-Farsi, welcome back to Monarchs. Sterling nodded curtly. We need privacy tonight, Thompson. Is our usual table ready? I'm afraid your usual table was reserved earlier this evening for Senator Mitchell. However, I have an excellent table by the west window that offers complete privacy. Sterling's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. For a moment it seemed he might object, might demand his preferred table regardless of prior reservations. The air in the restaurant grew tense as staff and nearby diners sensed the potential confrontation. But then something unexpected happened. Sterling glanced at Thompson's impassive face, and something like reluctant respect flickered in his eyes. The west window will be acceptable, he said finally. Thompson inclined his head slightly. Excellent. Please follow me. Your server this evening will be Ella, one of our finest. As Thompson led them to their table, Ella caught fragments of their conversation. I told you Thompson wouldn't budge even for you, Hassan was saying with quiet amusement. The man once made the King of Jordan wait for a table. There are few people in this city I respect, Hassan, Sterling replied. Thompson has earned his place on that very short list. They reached the table and Ella stepped forward. Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Ella. I'll be taking care of you tonight. Sterling barely glanced at her, taking his seat and immediately opening the leather portfolio containing investment documents. Hassan, however, offered a warm smile and a small nod of acknowledgement. Would you like to hear our specials this evening? Ella asked. No need, Sterling responded without looking up. Bring the Macallan 25 for me. Hassan will have his usual pomegranate seltzer. We'll order later. Very good, sir. Ella moved away to fetch their drinks, feeling Sterling's dismissal like a physical force. It was a familiar sensation, Simone. The way powerful men could make service staff disappear with just their tone, rendering them functionally invisible. When she returned with their drinks, Sterling and Hassan were deep in conversation about the Qatar deal. She placed Sterling's whiskey before him with practiced precision. As she set down Hassan's seltzer, Sterling's hand moved suddenly, bumping her arm. The crimson liquid splashed across the pristine white tablecloth and onto Sterling's sleeve. The restaurant seemed to freeze. Nearby conversations halted mid-sentence. Wait staff paused in their movements, watching the unfolding drama from the corners of their eyes. For God's sake, Sterling snapped, his voice cutting through the silence. Are you incapable of basic coordination? I apologize, sir, Ella responded immediately, blotting the spill with her service cloth. I'll bring you a fresh drink immediately. Don't bother, he said coldly. Just get someone to clean this mess properly. Hassan interceded gently. It was clearly an accident, Marcus. No harm done. But Sterling was already turning away, dismissing Ella entirely as he returned to their business discussion. She signaled discreetly for assistance, maintaining her professional composure, even as she registered the deliberate nature of what had just occurred. Sterling had moved his arm intentionally to cause the spill, a power play, a reminder of hierarchies. As she stepped away to get fresh napkins, she heard Sterling switch languages, speaking to Hassan in fluent Arabic. "These servers become more incompetent every time we visit," he said in Arabic, clearly assuming she wouldn't understand. "Probably some struggling actress who can barely remember drink orders, let alone manage a tray properly." Hassan responded in the same language, his tone mildly reproving. "She seems perfectly capable. The spill was hardly her fault." Sterling continued his Arabic flawless, but his tone increasingly cutting. "Look at her hands. Not the hands of someone educated or ambitious. Just another New York waitress who will serve the same tables for 20 years and never rise above her station." Ella maintained her neutral expression as she signaled a busser to change the tablecloth, giving no indication that she understood every word. She had grown up speaking Arabic, from age 6 had conducted diplomatic translations for her father by the time she was 16. Sterling's assumption of her ignorance was as predictable as it was misguided. As the busser efficiently changed the tablecloth and Ella brought fresh drinks, Sterling continued his Arabic commentary, now moving from personal insults to something more substantive. "The key to undermining Russo's position is accessing the environmental impact data before the formal negotiations. Our source at the EPA has the preliminary findings. Once we have those, we can force the Qataris to accept our original terms or risk the entire deal collapsing." This caught Ella's attention more sharply. He was discussing insider information, potentially illegal tactics, to undermine her father's diplomatic efforts. Hassan looked uncomfortable. "I'm not sure this approach honors the spirit of our partnership, Marcus. Honor doesn't build billion-dollar companies, Hassan. Results do." Sterling's Arabic was becoming more animated as he outlined his strategy. "Russo has been a thorn in my side for 20 years. If using this deal to finally put him in his place is a bonus to securing our profit margin, all the better." As Ella placed the fresh seltzer before Hassan, Sterling glanced up at her dismissively and added in Arabic, "Though I suppose we should be grateful for pretty waitresses who know their place. Certainly more useful than diplomatic daughters who think their fancy degrees make them qualified to sit at the negotiating table." It was the final straw. The comment struck too close to home, casting echoes of battles she had fought throughout her career. Without allowing her expression to change, Ella responded in perfect accent-free Arabic. "I find, Mr. Sterling, that those who judge others based on appearances often reveal more about themselves than those they attempt to diminish." The effect was electric. Sterling froze his glass halfway to his lips. Hassan's eyes widened, a mixture of shock and something that might have been appreciation crossing his face. Ella continued in Arabic, her voice calm and measured. "As for your strategy regarding the environmental impact data, I believe there are regulations against using non-public environmental assessments to manipulate international negotiations. Section 1752 of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act specifically addresses such tactics." She switched smoothly to English. "Would you gentlemen like to hear our specials, Bao, or would you prefer a few more minutes with the menu?" The silence at the table was absolute. Sterling stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. His gray eyes narrowed, reassessing everything about the woman standing before him. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. "Who are you?" Ella met his gaze steadily. "I'm your server for the evening, sir." "Your name," he insisted. "Your full name." For a moment, Ella considered lying, considered protecting the identity she had worked so hard to separate from her current life. But something in her rebelled against hiding, against allowing this man's arrogance to force her into deception. "Gabriella Russo," she answered simply. The name hit Sterling like a physical blow. His face paled slightly, the connection to Ambassador Victor Russo clearly registering immediately. "Ambassador Russo's daughter," he said flatly. "Yes." She maintained her professional smile. "Now about those specials." Sterling's expression hardened into a mask of controlled fury. "That will be all for now." Ella nodded and walked away, feeling the weight of Sterling's stare on her back. Thompson, who had been watching from across the room, met her eyes with a questioning look. She gave him a small nod to indicate everything was under control. But it wasn't, not really. In revealing her identity, she had just inserted herself into a decades-old conflict between two powerful men. And judging by the intensity of Sterling's reaction, the conflict ran far deeper than business rivalry. At the table, Hassan leaned toward Marcus. "Well," he said quietly in English, "this evening just became considerably more interesting." Marcus Sterling said nothing, his eyes following Ella as she moved efficiently around the restaurant. His mind was already racing connections, forming strategies, shifting. The daughter of Victor Russo was working as a waitress at Monarch's. The implications were staggering. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice that sounded remarkably like Sarah's whispered that perhaps after 20 years the game was about to change in ways none of them could predict. The morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Marcus Sterling's office, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like miniature galaxies. Marcus had been there since 5, his suit jacket draped over a chair, sleeves rolled up to his elbows as he pored over documents spread across his expansive desk. He hadn't slept. The encounter at Monarch's had disturbed his carefully ordered world in ways he couldn't yet fully comprehend. Jack Reynolds entered without knocking, a manila folder tucked under his arm. At 50, the former FBI agent carried himself with the alert precision of a man who had spent his life assessing threats. His weathered face revealed nothing as he placed the folder on Marcus's desk. "Everything we have on Gabriella Russo," he said, his voice gravelly from decades of black coffee and late nights. Marcus opened the folder and began scanning the contents. Photographs of a younger Gabriella at diplomatic functions, academic transcripts, news clippings, a life documented with clinical precision. "Tell me what I'm looking at," Marcus said, not looking up from the papers. Jack leaned against the edge of the desk, arms folded across his chest. "She's 30, only child of Ambassador Victor Russo. Her mother, Elena, died when she was 12. Cancer. After that, she was raised primarily in embassies across the Middle East and Europe. Speaks 7 languages fluently. Doctorate in International Relations from Georgetown. Until 6 months ago, she was her father's unofficial right hand, representing him in preliminary negotiations across the Middle East and Asia." Marcus looked up at that. "And then she vanished from the diplomatic radar, resigned from her position at the UN, cut ties with her father's circles." Jack tapped a finger on one document. "No credit card activity under her name until a new account appeared in New York 6 months ago. Minimal footprint. She's been living deliberately under the radar." Marcus leaned back in his chair, absorbing this information. What would make a diplomat's daughter with her credentials walk away from everything to serve drinks at Monarch's? "That's the interesting part," Jack replied. "There's no scandal, no public falling out. By all accounts, she and her father were close, but there were rumors in diplomatic circles that she was increasingly frustrated with being in her father's shadow. Some suggested she wanted to forge her own path separate from the Russo name and influence." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "So Victor doesn't know where his daughter is?" "According to my sources, he's been quietly looking for her for months. Keeping it private, of course. Wouldn't want anyone to know the great ambassador lost track of his most valuable asset." Marcus stood and walked to the window, watching the morning sun glint off the neighboring skyscrapers. "She heard everything we discussed last night, about the Qatar deal, about our strategy to counter Victor's position. A potential security breach," Jack acknowledged, "though it's unclear where her loyalties lie given her current estrangement from her father." Marcus turned back to face his security director. "I want to know everything, where she lives, who she talks to, her daily routine, if she's made contact with Victor since last night." Jack nodded, already making mental notes. "And if she has, then we need to assess whether she represents a threat to our position or—" Marcus paused, a new thought forming. "Or an opportunity." An opportunity. Marcus picked up a photograph from the folder, studying the image of Gabriella at a diplomatic function, standing confidently beside her father. Victor's greatest strength has always been his ability to keep his professional and personal lives separate. His diplomatic persona is impeccable. But his daughter— Marcus tapped the photograph thoughtfully. "She might be the key to understanding what he's really planning with this deal." Jack frowned slightly. "Approaching her directly could backfire. If she reconciles with her father and tells him about our interest—" "I'm aware of the risks," Marcus cut him off. But there's something else at play here. She didn't have to reveal her identity last night. She could have simply served our table and walked away. Instead, she chose to confront me. He set the photograph down. Find out everything you can. I want a full assessment on my desk by noon. As Jack left, Marcus returned to the window. The Qatar deal represented more than just a $20 billion energy contract. It was the culmination of years of strategy positioning Sterling Global as the dominant force in next-generation energy development. Victor Russo, standing in his way yet again, felt like history repeating itself with painful precision. He thought of Gabriella Russo's eyes as she had revealed her identity. There had been defiance there, but something else too. A complexity that suggested her story with her father might be as complicated as his own. Across the city, in her small Brooklyn apartment, Ella sat at her kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling before her as she stared at her phone. 3 missed calls from an unlisted number. She suspected they were from her brother Nicholas, the only family member who knew where she lived. When the phone rang again, she answered. Ella, Nicholas's voice was tense, urgent. Thank God. I've been trying to reach you all morning. I was working late, she replied, rubbing her temples. The events of the previous night had left her with a pounding headache. You need to be careful, Nicholas said, lowering his voice, even though they were on a private line. Marcus Sterling has people looking into you. Ella felt a chill run through her. How do you know this? I have contacts at Sterling Global. They started asking questions about you this morning. Urgent questions. There was a pause. What happened, Ella? Why would Sterling suddenly be interested in you? She considered how much to tell her younger brother. Nicholas worked at a prestigious law firm specializing in international trade, keeping him adjacent to, but separate from their father's diplomatic world. At 27, he had carved out his own identity while maintaining the family connections Ella had chosen to sever. I ran into Sterling last night, she said carefully. At the restaurant. Nicholas exhaled sharply. And he recognized you, how you've never met him formally. He didn't recognize me. She hesitated. I may have revealed my identity after he made some disparaging remarks in Arabic, assuming I wouldn't understand. Ella, Nicholas groaned, you confronted Marcus Sterling. Do you have any idea how dangerous that man is, especially to our family? I know about his business rivalry with father, if that's what you mean. It's not just business, Nicholas said, his voice dropping even lower. Look, there are things about Sterling and father that you don't know. Things father never talks about. Like what? Nicholas hesitated. I'm not supposed to know this myself. I found it by accident when I was helping organize father's old papers last year. There was a photograph, Sterling and father together. They looked young, maybe college age. They were smiling, arms around each other's shoulders like what Nicholas, like friends, best friends. Father had written on the back, Marcus and Victor brothers, in all but blood, 1985. Ella sat back in her chair trying to process this revelation. Her father and Marcus Sterling had been friends. Close friends. It contradicted everything she knew about their relationship. There's more, Nicholas continued. I confronted father about it. He was angry that I'd seen the photograph, but he finally admitted that he and Sterling were once like family. He wouldn't tell me what happened in between them, just that some betrayals can never be forgiven. Whose betrayal? Ella asked. Father's or Sterling's? He wouldn't say, but Ella, the Qatar deal has him more stressed than I've ever seen him. When he heard Sterling was involved on the corporate side, he almost backed out entirely. Ella thought about Sterling's comments at Monarchs, his obvious animosity toward her father, the personal satisfaction he seemed to take in the prospect of undermining the deal. Nicholas, has father ever mentioned Sterling's wife Sarah? No, why, just something I overheard. She didn't want to share Sterling's accusation that their father had refused to help when Sarah was ill. It seemed too personal, too raw to repeat without verification. Ella, please be careful. If Sterling knows who you are, you're in a dangerous position. Father would want... I don't particularly care what father would want, she interrupted, her voice hardening. I left that life for a reason. I know, Nicholas's voice softened, but regardless of your feelings about Father, Sterling is dangerous. He destroys people who get in his way. And now you've placed yourself directly in his path. After they hung up, Ella sat in silence, contemplating her brother's warnings. The revelation that her father and Sterling had once been close friends added a layer of complexity to an already complicated situation. What could have happened to transform that friendship into such bitter enmity? She looked at her watch. Her shift at Monarchs didn't start until 4. She had time to seek answers from someone who might have insights into old Manhattan feuds and long-buried secrets. She dressed quickly and headed out into the bright spring morning, her destination clear in her mind. Bill Anderson lived in the apartment directly above hers, a space filled with military memorabilia and history books. As a former intelligence officer who had moved in classified circles for decades, Bill knew things about powerful people that never made it into public records. He answered her knock wearing reading glasses, in a cardigan, looking every bit the retired professor, rather than the man who had once run covert operations across 3 continents. "Twice in 24 hours, he said with a smile. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I need information, Bill, about Marcus Sterling and my father." Bill's smile faded slightly. He stepped back, gesturing for her to enter. "I had a feeling you might come asking about that sooner or later." Ella followed him into the apartment, taking a seat at his cluttered dining table while he prepared tea with methodical precision. "So," he said, setting a steaming cup before her, "you've run into Sterling." "How did you know?" Bill's eyes twinkled. "Old habits die hard. I still keep my ear to the ground. Sterling was at Monarchs last night. You work at Monarchs. It doesn't take intelligence training to put that together." Ella wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "Did you know that Sterling and my father were once friends?" Bill settled into the chair across from her with a sigh. "Yes, though friends doesn't quite capture it. From what I understand, they were closer than brothers at one point." "What happened between them?" Bill took a thoughtful sip of his tea. "Some say it was business. Some say it was personal. The truth, as usual, probably lies somewhere in between." "Bill," Ella said with gentle exasperation, "I don't need cryptic intelligence officer. Speak right now. I need actual information." He smiled apologetically. "Sorry, professional habit." He set down his cup. "Victor Russo and Marcus Sterling met at Columbia. Both brilliant, both ambitious, but from completely different worlds. Your father came from diplomatic aristocracy. His path was essentially predetermined. Sterling came from nothing. A scholarship student with a chip on his shoulder and something to prove. They became friends despite those differences. Because of them, I'd say. They complemented each other. Your father had the connections, the polish. Sterling had the raw intelligence and drive. After graduation, they started a company together. This was long before Sterling Global, of course. A small consulting firm focusing on international trade. I never knew father was involved in business," Ella said, surprised. "He's always been purely diplomatic." This was before he fully committed to the diplomatic track. The business was actually doing quite well when the partnership imploded. Bill hesitated. "And this is where the story gets complicated." "How so?" "There was a woman involved, Elena Martelli, your mother." Ella felt a jolt of surprise. "My mother? What did she have to do with their falling out?" Bill's expression grew somber. "From what I've heard, both men were in love with her. She initially had feelings for Sterling, but ultimately chose your father. And Sterling couldn't accept that. It went deeper than that. Around the same time their business faced a crisis. A major deal collapsed. Each man blamed the other. Accusations of betrayal were thrown from both sides. The partnership dissolved bitterly." Ella tried to process this information. "But that doesn't explain why they still hate each other so intensely after all these years. People fall in and out of love. Businesses fail. Life goes on." Bill leaned forward, his voice dropping. "There's more to it, Ella. Something darker that happened later. Something connected to Sterling's wife, Sarah, and her death. Her death, Sterling mentioned last night that father refused to help when Sarah was ill." Bill nodded grimly. "Sarah Sterling died of a rare form of cancer 15 years ago. Treatments were experimental and extraordinarily expensive. Sterling's company was still growing, then not the behemoth it is today. The story goes that he reached out to your father for help, financial help, connections to specialists, something. Whatever he asked for, Victor refused." "That doesn't sound like my father," Ella said, troubled by the implication. "Perhaps not, but Sterling believes it. He believes your father could have helped save Sarah and chose not to out of lingering resentment over Elena and the business. Bill took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Whether it's true or not almost doesn't matter anymore. Sterling has built his entire empire with that belief fueling him. The hatred has become fundamental to who he is. Ella sat back, her tea forgotten. And now they're facing off over the Qatar deal, which is about far more than just money, Bill added. The technology at the heart of that deal could reshape global energy politics for the next century. Both men know it. Both want to control it, albeit for different reasons. What reasons? Your father likely believes that technology should be regulated through diplomatic channels, ensuring equitable global access. Sterling sees it as the next great market opportunity, a chance to dominate the energy sector completely. Bill fixed her with a penetrating gaze. And now somehow you've placed yourself between these two forces. Ella met his gaze steadily. Not intentionally. Perhaps not, but Sterling now knows who you are. That changes everything. What do you think he'll do? Bill considered this carefully. Sterling is strategic above all else. He'll see you as either a threat or an asset in his ongoing battle with your father. His expression grew concerned. The question is, which are you, Ella? And what will you do when he makes his move? She had no answer. When she returned to her apartment, Ella found signs of a careful intrusion. Nothing was obviously disturbed, but small details betrayed a professional search. A book aligned too perfectly on the shelf, a drawer closed too precisely. Someone had been there while she was out. Her first instinct was to check the hidden compartment behind a loose baseboard under her bed, where she kept her most personal possessions, including her father's Cartier watch. It was untouched. Whoever had searched her apartment hadn't found it. A chill ran through her as she realized what this meant. Sterling wasn't wasting any time. He was already gathering intelligence, assessing her as a potential factor in his plans. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We should talk, car waiting outside. No obligation, just conversation. MS. Ella moved to the window and glanced down at the street. A black Maybach sedan idled at the curb, its tinted windows revealing nothing of its occupants. The message was clear. Sterling knew where she lived, could reach her whenever he wanted, and was offering an olive branch of sorts by inviting rather than compelling her presence. She considered ignoring the message, but that would only delay the inevitable. Better to confront this situation directly than live in anticipation of Sterling's next move. She changed quickly into a simple but elegant navy dress, a remnant of her former life, and headed downstairs. The driver opened the door as she approached, revealing Marcus Sterling sitting alone in the spacious rear compartment. No assistant, no security, a deliberate choice that spoke volumes. Ms. Russo, he greeted her, his voice controlled and formal. Thank you for agreeing to meet. I'm not sure agreeing is the right word, she replied, sliding into the seat opposite him. But here I am. Sterling nodded to the driver and the car pulled smoothly away from the curb. I apologize for the dramatic approach. I thought a private conversation would be beneficial for both of us. After sending someone to search my apartment, Ella fixed him with a direct gaze. If Sterling was surprised by her accusation, he didn't show it. A precaution. Nothing was taken. That's not the point. No, he agreed unexpectedly. It's not, and for that I apologize. Old habits from a lifetime of corporate warfare. He gestured to a small bar built into the door panel. Would you like something to drink? Water, coffee? Nothing, thank you. Ella studied him in the filtered light of the moving car. Up close, without the charged atmosphere of monarchs, she could see the lines of fatigue around his eyes, the slight silver at his temples that gave him a distinguished air, despite the hardness of his expression. What do you want, Mr. Sterling? Direct. I appreciate that. He leaned back slightly. I want to understand why Ambassador Victor Russo's brilliant daughter is working as a waitress at Monarchs instead of helping her father secure the Qatar deal that could define his diplomatic legacy. Ella raised an eyebrow. My career choices are hardly your concern. They became my concern the moment you revealed your identity to me while I was discussing confidential business strategies. His gray eyes held hers steadily. You made yourself my concern, Ms. Russo. Gabriella, she corrected him. Or Ella, if we're going to have this conversation, let's dispense with the formalities. A flicker of something possibly approval crossed his face. Ella then, and you can call me Marcus. What do you really want, Marcus? Because I doubt you arranged this meeting just to question my career choices. He studied her for a moment longer, then seemed to come to a decision. I want to offer you a job. Of all the things she had expected, this wasn't one of them. Excuse me, a consulting position at Sterling Global. Your expertise in international relations, your language skills, your understanding of diplomatic protocols, all would be valuable assets to my company, particularly in relation to the Qatar negotiations. Ella let out a short, incredulous laugh. You're offering me a job to spy on my father. I'm offering you a job because you're qualified, he countered smoothly. Your relationship with Ambassador Russo is a complicated factor, not the primary motivation. Do you really expect me to believe that? Not entirely, no. His candor was surprising. But I do believe that you walked away from your father's world for a reason. I'm offering you an opportunity to use your considerable skills in a different arena. One where you might make an impact on your own terms, not as an extension of Victor Russo. The car had been circling Manhattan as they talked, passing through Midtown, and now heading down the West Side Highway. The Hudson River glittered in the afternoon sun, a momentary distraction from the intensity of their conversation. Why would I trust you? Ella asked finally. You clearly have a decades-long vendetta against my father. Something hardened in Sterling's expression. Your father and I have a complicated history. Yes, I know, you were once friends. Brothers in all but blood, I believe was the phrase. Now it was Sterling's turn to look surprised. He told you about our history. No, my father has never mentioned your name in personal terms. Only as a business adversary. She watched his reaction carefully. I have other sources of information. Sterling absorbed this, his expression unreadable. Then you know that what exists between Victor and me goes beyond business rivalry. I know there are conflicting versions of what happened between you. I know my mother was involved somehow, and I know you blame my father for not helping your wife when she was ill. Pain flashed across Sterling's face, so raw and unexpected that Ella nearly flinched. In that unguarded moment, she glimpsed the depth of his loss, still fresh even after 15 years. Sarah was diagnosed with a rare form of aggressive lymphoma. He said, his voice lower now, controlled, but with an underlying current of old grief. There was an experimental treatment available in Switzerland. Extraordinarily expensive, with no guarantee of success, but the only hope we had. He looked out the window, seeming to address the passing city rather than Ella directly. My company was still growing then. I had assets, but not liquid capital of that magnitude. I swallowed my pride and went to your father. And he refused to help, Ella prompted gently when Sterling fell silent. He wasn't in New York when I tried to reach him. He was in Tehran on a diplomatic mission. I left messages, sent emails, explained the urgency. Sterling's hands tightened slightly on his knee. He never responded, not a word. By the time I secured the funding through other means, it was too late. Sarah died 3 months after her diagnosis. I'm sorry, Ella said and meant it. But I find it hard to believe my father would deliberately ignore such a request regardless of your past conflicts. Sterling turned back to her, his expression hardening again. Your father is an excellent diplomat because he excels at showing people only what he wants them to see. You, of all people, should understand that. The comment struck uncomfortably close to home. How many times had she watched her father compartmentalize, separating his diplomatic persona from his private self with surgical precision? How many times had she done the same in her own diplomatic career? What is it you expect from me exactly, she asked, redirecting the conversation. If I were to accept your offer, your insights on diplomatic approach, particularly regarding Middle Eastern negotiation strategies, your language skills in contexts where translators might not be appropriate, and your perspective on how your father might respond to various proposals. Sterling held up a hand as she began to protest. I'm not asking for confidential information or family secrets. I'm asking for your professional assessment as someone who understands both the diplomatic world and Victor Russo's methodologies. Ella considered his words carefully. And what makes you think I would work against my father's interests regardless of our current estrangement? I don't expect you to work against him, Sterling replied. I expect you to work for a solution that serves the broader interests at stake. The Qatar technology has implications far beyond corporate profit or diplomatic prestige. For the first time, Ella felt a flicker of genuine interest. What do you mean? The energy conversion system at the heart of the Qatar deal isn't just another incremental improvement in renewable technology. It's a fundamental breakthrough that could accelerate the global transition away from fossil fuels by decades. Sterling leaned forward slightly. Your father wants it controlled by international committees and diplomatic frameworks that will strangle its implementation in red tape for years. I want to deploy it rapidly globally through market mechanisms that will drive adoption at scale. And make sterling global billions in the process, Ella added pointedly. Yes, he acknowledged without hesitation. Profit is a powerful motivator for innovation and expansion, but that doesn't negate the environmental impact. The car had completed its circuit of Lower Manhattan and was now heading back toward Brooklyn. I need time to consider your offer, Ella said finally. Of course. Sterling reached into his jacket and produced a business card. My private number. When you're ready to discuss terms, call me directly. As the car pulled up outside her building, Sterling added, one more thing, Ella. Has your father contacted you since last night? She hesitated at the door. No, as I mentioned, we're currently estranged. But your brother Nicholas knows where you are. The casual mention of her brother's name was a calculated reminder of Sterling's reach his network of information. Yes, she acknowledged. Nicholas knows. And if Nicholas were to inform your father of our meeting today, Ella met his gaze steadily. Then that would be his choice, not mine. Sterling nodded, accepting this. I look forward to hearing from you, regardless of your decision. As the car pulled away, Ella stood on the sidewalk, feeling the weight of competing loyalties and unresolved questions. Whatever path she chose next would inevitably draw her deeper into the conflict between these two powerful men, a conflict she was beginning to suspect had shaped her own life in ways she had never realized. Her phone buzzed again. This time the message was from her manager at Monarchs. Mr. Thompson requests that you come in early today. Matter of importance. Another conversation she couldn't avoid. Another piece of the complex puzzle her life had suddenly become. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, she noticed a distinguished Middle Eastern man waiting in the hallway outside her door. Hassan Al-Farsi rose from where he had been sitting patiently greeting her with a respectful nod. Ms. Russo, I apologize for the unexpected visit. I was hoping we might speak briefly. Ella assessed him quickly. Unlike Sterling's commanding presence, Hassan projected calm thoughtfulness. His eyes held intelligence without aggression. How did you find my address, Mr. Al-Farsi? He smiled slightly. I asked your neighbor, Mr. Anderson, a fascinating man with an impressive knowledge of geopolitical history. Of course, Bill would have recognized Hassan from his diplomatic days. What can I do for you? She asked, unlocking her door but not inviting him inside. I wanted to speak with you separately from Marcus, Hassan said, to offer a different perspective on the situation you find yourself in. Ella hesitated, then stepped aside, allowing him to enter. Unlike Sterling's calculated power plays, Hassan's approach felt genuine, lacking hidden agendas. Inside, he declined her offer of tea, getting directly to the point. I have known both Marcus Sterling and your father for many years, he began. Two brilliant men, each committed to their vision of the world. And now, by strange circumstance, you have become a potential bridge between them. I have no interest in being a bridge, Mr. Al-Farsi. I left diplomatic mediation behind 6 months ago. Hassan smiled gently. Yet here you are at the center of a situation that may require precisely those skills. He clasped his hands together. I assume Marcus has made you an offer of employment. He has. And your father, has he reached out since learning of your whereabouts? Not yet. Hassan nodded thoughtfully. The Qatar deal is important, Ms. Russo. More important than either man's pride or past grievances. The technology involved could transform energy access for millions who currently live without reliable power. It could reduce carbon emissions significantly within a decade if implemented properly. Why are you telling me this? Because both Sterling and your father have valid perspectives on how this technology should be deployed. Neither is entirely right or entirely wrong. What is needed is balanced diplomatic oversight with market efficiency. Ella studied him carefully. And you think I can somehow facilitate this balance? I think you understand both worlds in a way few others do. You know the diplomatic realm through your father. You have now glimpsed the corporate approach through Sterling. Hassan spread his hands. You also have the advantage of not being blinded by 20 years of personal animosity. The insight struck Ella as both accurate and unsettling. Despite her estrangement from her father's world, she still carried its lessons within her. And despite her initial disdain for Sterling's corporate ruthlessness, she recognized the efficiency of his approach. What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Al-Farsi? I am suggesting nothing specific at this moment, he replied carefully, merely offering context as you consider your options, and perhaps extending an invitation. An invitation. The preliminary talks begin next week at the UN. Your father will be representing the international regulatory framework. Marcus will be there for Sterling Global's interests. I will be representing Qatar. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small embossed card. As my personal guest, should you wish to observe. Ella took the card, turning it over in her fingers. Why would you want me there? Hassan rose to leave, his expression thoughtful. Sometimes, Ms. Russo, the most important voice in a negotiation is the one that has no formal seat at the table. The observer who sees what the participants blinded by their own positions cannot. At the door he paused. One more thing. The conflict between your father and Marcus Sterling goes deeper than either has likely admitted to you. There are layers to their history that even I, knowing them both for years, do not fully comprehend. What do you mean? Only that in matters of decades-old enmity, truth is rarely found in one person's version of events, even your father's. With that cryptic statement, he departed, leaving Ella with more questions than answers. She looked at the two business cards in her hand, Sterling's and Al-Farsi's. Two invitations into a world she had deliberately left behind. Two paths back into the complex web of power, influence, and conflicting agendas she had struggled to escape. Her phone buzzed again. A text from Nicholas. Father knows you're in New York. He wants to see you, says it's important. And now a third path opened before her, the one she had been avoiding for 6 months. Whatever choice she made next would irrevocably alter the careful separation she had built between her past and present. There would be no going back to the anonymous simplicity of life as just Ella the waitress at Monarch's. That identity, like so many she had worn throughout her life, had served its purpose. It was time to decide who Gabriella Russo truly was, beyond her father's shadow, beyond Sterling's machinations, beyond even her own carefully constructed escape. The Cartier watch ticked softly in its hiding place, counting down the moments to a decision that would echo far beyond her own life into the corridors of power where men like her father and Marcus Sterling shaped the world through will influence in the careful application of pressure. She had fled that world once. Now it seemed it had found her anyway. The only question remaining was how she would engage with it, this time on others' terms, or finally irrevocably on her own. The late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Monarch's, casting long shadows across the empty dining room. Robert Thompson stood polishing a crystal decanter, his methodical movements of physical meditation perfected over 30 years in the restaurant business. He sensed Ella's arrival without turning, a skill developed from decades of acute spatial awareness. Ms. Russo, he said, finally looking up, or should I address you as Ambassador Russo's daughter, Mom? Ella approached, still wearing the navy dress from her meeting with Sterling. Ella is still fine, Mr. Thompson. He set down the decanter and studied her with the penetrating gaze that had witnessed countless power plays across his dining room. I've served presidents, prime ministers, and potentates in this establishment, Ms. Russo. I've watched billion-dollar deals materialize over dessert and marriages dissolve before the appetizers arrived. But last night was something special. I apologize for any disruption. No need. Thompson gestured toward the table by the window, inviting her to sit. Marcus Sterling has been coming to Monarch's for 15 years. In all that time, I've never seen anyone stand up to him the way you did. It was refreshing. Ella settled into the chair, surprised by Thompson's candor. I assume you've known my real identity all along. Since your interview 6 months ago. At her raised eyebrow, he continued, I make it my business to know who works in my restaurant. A simple background check revealed enough discrepancies in your application to warrant deeper investigation. Yet you hired me anyway. Thompson's lips curved in a small smile. I was curious why Ambassador Russo's brilliant daughter wanted to serve Dover's soul to Manhattan's elite. And he added, you were clearly qualified despite your attempts to hide your experience in formal service settings. Ella acknowledged this with a slight nod. And now the situation has evolved. Thompson sat across from her. Sterling called this morning. He asked about your work schedule, your performance, your interactions with other staff and guests. What did you tell him? That your employment details are confidential. Thompson's expression remained neutral, but Ella detected a hint of pride in his tone. Even Sterling knows better than to press me on such matters. Thank you. She studied the immaculate tablecloth, gathering her thoughts. Mr. Thompson, I think it's only fair to tell you I may need to take a leave of absence. I assumed as much. He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. Your final paycheck, including the 2 weeks' notice you would have given under normal circumstances. Ella accepted the envelope, touched by the gesture. That's very generous. It's practical. Your position here has been compromised. Whatever happens next in the Sterling Russo saga, Monarchs can no longer be your sanctuary. His eyes softened slightly, though our door will always remain open should you wish to return under different circumstances. Thank you. She rose to leave, but Thompson's voice stopped her. Ms. Russo, Ella, a word of advice from someone who has observed powerful men for most of his life. She turned back, waiting. Men like your father and Marcus Sterling create reality through sheer force of will. They bend the world to their vision and rarely look back to count the cost. But that doesn't mean you must operate by their rules. He straightened a fork on the table with precise fingers. In my experience, true power often lies not with those who make the most noise, but with those who know when to speak and when to listen. His words followed her as she left Monarchs for the last time, resonating with unexpected wisdom that seemed particularly applicable to her current predicament. Outside, twilight was descending on Manhattan, the transition from day to night mirroring her own uncertain position between worlds. Her phone chimed with a text from Nicholas. Father is staying at the Pierre, Suite 1620. He's expecting you at 7. Ella checked her watch. Just enough time to go home and change before meeting the father she hadn't spoken to in 6 months. The prospect filled her with a complex mixture of emotions, apprehension, residual anger, but also a surprising longing for connection that she hadn't anticipated. 40 minutes later, she stood before the elegant doors of Suite 1620 at the Pierre Hotel, her hand raised to knock. She had changed into a simple black dress, professional, elegant, but deliberately not the diplomatic attire her father would have expected from the daughter who once stood at his side at functions around the world. Before her knuckles could meet the wood, the door opened. Ambassador Victor Russo stood in the doorway, his imposing frame momentarily frozen at the sight of his daughter. At 65, he remained a commanding presence. Silver hair, immaculately styled posture, military straight, his tailored suit a second skin that projected authority without effort. Gabriella. Her name escaped his lips like a prayer, fragile and reverent. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the 6-month gulf between them, simultaneously vast and insignificant. Then, with a movement that surprised them both, Victor stepped forward and embraced his daughter tightly. The unexpected display of emotion broke something in Ella. Her arms, initially stiff at her sides, slowly rose to return her father's embrace. She felt a slight tremor in his shoulders, the physical evidence of feelings her diplomatically disciplined father rarely displayed. When they finally separated, Victor ushered her inside his usual composure, returning incrementally as he led her to the sitting area of the luxurious suite. You look well, he said, his eyes cataloging the changes in his daughter. So do you, Ella replied, though she noted new lines of fatigue etched around her father's eyes, a certain weariness that hadn't been there before. Would you like something to drink? A tea? Something stronger? Tea is fine. Victor busied himself with the hotel's electric kettle, a strangely domestic action from a man who typically had staff attending to such details. The mundane task seemed to center him, providing a moment to gather his thoughts. Nicholas told me you were in New York, he said, finally placing a cup of tea before her, though he refused to give me your address, loyal to you even against his father. He was respecting my wishes. Victor nodded, accepting this. And now, would you have come to me if Sterling hadn't forced your hand? The question caught her off guard. You know about Sterling. I know you confronted him at Monarchs. I know he tracked you down afterward. Victor's eyes hardened slightly. Marcus Sterling has never done anything without multiple layers of calculation. Whatever he's told you, whatever he's offered you, remember that. Ella sipped her tea, using the moment to study her father. He said some interesting things about your history together, things you've never mentioned. A flicker of something, pain, regret, anger, crossed Victor's face. The past should remain in the past. Not if it's affecting the present. Ella set down her cup. He told me you refused to help when his wife was dying. Is that true? Victor closed his eyes briefly, looking suddenly older. It's not that simple. Then explain it to me. Because right now I'm hearing very different versions of history from two men who seem determined to destroy each other over it. Her father moved to the window, looking out at the twinkling Manhattan skyline. Marcus and I were friends once, more than friends. We were like brothers. We built our first company together, Sterling Russo International. We had compatible skills, my diplomatic connections, his business acumen. And then Mother came into the picture, Ella prompted. Victor turned surprised. You know about that? I've been piecing things together. You and Sterling both loved her. She chose you. Yes. Victor's expression softened at the mention of his late wife. Elena was completing her master's in international relations when we met. She and Marcus dated briefly first, but he trailed off. She fell in love with you instead. Victor nodded. Marcus claimed to accept it, even stood as my best man at our wedding. But things were never the same after that. He returned to his seat, shoulders heavy with old memories. Then came the Beirut deal. What happened? Our company had secured a major infrastructure contract in Lebanon. It would have established us internationally, set us up for decades of growth. But there were complications, political instability, competing local interests. Victor's diplomatic training was evident in his measured recounting. I advocated caution. Marcus pushed for aggressive expansion, taking risks I felt were unethical and possibly illegal. You disagreed on approach. We fought bitterly. When I wouldn't yield, Marcus went behind my back, made promises to local officials I couldn't support. Victor's voice hardened. The deal collapsed spectacularly. We lost everything we'd built. Our investors pulled out. The company was essentially bankrupt. And you blamed each other, Elda concluded. Yes. Victor met her eyes directly. I left the business world entirely after that, returned to diplomatic service. Marcus started over from nothing, built Sterling Global through sheer force of will and a ruthlessness I could never match. He paused. We didn't speak for years after that, until his wife became ill. Victor's expression clouded. Sarah's illness, that's the part he never understood. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I was in Tehran when he tried to reach me. The hostage negotiation crisis. Complete communications blackout for 3 weeks. By the time I returned and received his messages, Sarah had already passed. You never told him this. I tried once. He refused to listen, refused to believe it wasn't deliberate indifference on my part. Victor's voice grew quiet. By then, his hatred had become fundamental to his identity. He needed me to be the villain in his story. Ella absorbed this, comparing her father's account with Sterling's own version. Both contain truth, both contain perspective clouded by pain and time. And now you're facing each other over the Qatar deal, she said. Yes, though this is different. Victor straightened, his diplomatic persona reasserting itself. This technology isn't just another business opportunity, Gabriella. It could transform global energy access, particularly in developing regions. If controlled by a single corporate entity, particularly one as aggressive as Sterling Global, it would prioritize profit over equitable distribution, Ella finished. Exactly. Victor studied his daughter's face. Sterling approached you, didn't he? Offered you a position. Ella nodded, and Hassan Al-Farsi made contact as well. She looked up surprised. How did you know? A small smile crossed Victor's face. Hassan is an old friend. He called to tell me he'd met you, thought you might have valuable perspective. The smile faded. What did Sterling offer you? A consulting position. He wants my diplomatic expertise and language skills. And my insights through you, Victor added bluntly. He claims that's not his primary motivation. And you believe him. Ella considered the question carefully. I believe his interest is more complex than simple corporate espionage. There's something personal at play. Victor nodded slowly. There always is with Marcus. He rose and retrieved a weathered wooden box from his briefcase. There's something you should see. He placed the box on the coffee table between them and opened it. Inside lay photographs, letters, and small mementos. Personal history carefully preserved. He selected a faded envelope and handed it to Ella. This arrived a week after Sarah's funeral. I never opened it. Ella examined the envelope. Sterling's handwriting was instantly recognizable. Bold, angular, decisive even in grief. Why not fear, perhaps? Victor's admission was startling in its vulnerability. Fear of what it might contain. By then our enmity was so entrenched that it seemed safer to maintain the distance between us. With her father's silent permission, Ella carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single page, the handwriting less controlled than the address, betraying emotional turmoil as it was written. Victor, it began without preamble. Sarah is gone. Whatever stands between us, I thought you should know. She spoke of you near the end. Remember the dinner at your embassy in London, how you made her laugh with stories of diplomatic mishaps. She forgave easily, more easily than I ever could. Elena made me promise once that no matter what happened, we would remember we were brothers first before we were rivals. I've failed that promise for too long. If you're willing to try again for Elena's sake, for Sarah's memory, perhaps we can find our way back. Marcus, Ella looked up from the letter, seeing her father through new eyes. He reached out to reconcile and you never responded. I never knew he had reached out at all. Victor's voice was hollow with regret. By the time I found courage to open my mail from that period, months had passed. I tried calling then, but Marcus refused to take my calls. By that point, he had assumed my silence was a deliberate rejection. And neither of you has tried to clarify this in 15 years. Victor spread his hands helplessly. Pride, stubbornness, the comfortable familiarity of an enemy versus the unpredictable risk of reconciliation. Ella placed the letter carefully back in the box. And now the Qatar deal has forced you back into each other's orbits. With $20 billion and potentially world-changing technology at stake. Victor's expression grew serious. Gabriella, whatever Sterling has offered you, I hope you'll consider carefully. His vision for this technology is fundamentally incompatible with equitable global access. And you're confident your approach is better, Ella challenged gently. International committees and regulatory frameworks that might delay implementation for years while people continue to lack reliable energy. Victor looked momentarily surprised by her pushback. You sound like him. I sound like someone trying to see multiple perspectives, she corrected. Something diplomats are supposed to excel at. A reluctant smile touched his lips. Touché. He reached across the table tentatively, taking her hand. I've missed you, Gabriella, not just your skills or your support. You, your perspective, your challenge. These past 6 months have been difficult. The simple admission, so unlike her typically reserved father, touched Ella deeply. I needed space to find out who I am outside your shadow, outside the diplomatic world that's been my entire life. And have you found yourself? She considered the question, thinking of her months at Monarchs, the strange sense of freedom and anonymity, and the equally powerful pull of meaningful work she'd felt when engaging with Sterling and her father about the Qatar technology. I'm getting closer, she said finally. But I'm beginning to think the answer isn't in rejecting my past entirely, but in integrating it with whatever comes next. Victor nodded, understanding in his eyes. Whatever you decide about Sterling's offer, about your path forward, know that I support you, even if it means you working with him. The magnanimity of this statement, given the decades of enmity between the two men, was not lost on Ella. Thank you. As she prepared to leave, Victor asked quietly, will I see you again before you decide? Yes, she promised. This isn't goodbye again. The weight of reconciliation, however tentative, lightened her steps as she left the pier and stepped into the cool evening air. The conversation with her father had filled in crucial pieces of the puzzle, but the full picture was still forming in her mind. One more conversation remained, perhaps the most important one of all. Marcus Sterling's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek glass tower in Tribeca. Unlike the ostentatious displays of wealth common among Manhattan's elite, the building was discreet, its security state-of-the-art, but nearly invisible to casual observation. The private elevator required both a key card and biometric confirmation. Ella had neither, but the concierge recognized her name immediately when she inquired. "Ms. Russo, Mr. Sterling is expecting you. Please." He guided her to the elevator using his own credentials to send her directly to the pen. The doors opened into a space that defied expectations. Rather than the cold modernism she had anticipated, Sterling's home was warm, filled with books, art, and comfortable furnishings. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the Manhattan skyline, but the interior spoke of substance over show. Marcus stood at a baby grand piano, seemingly lost in thought, his fingers resting on the keys without playing. He had exchanged his business suit for casual attire, dark jeans and a simple cashmere sweaters that softened his imposing presence without diminishing it. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said without turning, somehow aware of her presence. "I wasn't sure either," Ella admitted, stepping further into the room. Now he did turn, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. "You've spoken with your father." "Yes. And he warned you about my nefarious intentions." A hint of sardonic humor colored his tone. "Actually, he showed me a letter you sent him after your wife died. A letter he never opened." The casual mask dropped from Sterling's face, raw emotion replacing it. "What?" "He was in Tehran during a hostage crisis when Sarah passed away. Complete communications blackout. By the time he received your messages, it was too late." Ella watched him process this information. "He tried to explain afterward, but by then I'd decided he'd deliberately ignored me." Sterling moved to the window, his reflection superimposed against the city lights below. 20 years of bitterness based on a misunderstanding, complicated by real grievances and genuine philosophical differences, Ella added. He acknowledged this with a slight nod. "Have you decided about my offer?" "I've been considering a counter-proposal." Interest flickered in his eyes. "I'm listening." "The Qatar technology is too important for either a pure corporate approach or pure diplomatic control." Ella moved to stand beside him at the window. "What it needs is balance. Market efficiency with ethical oversight, rapid deployment with equitable access guarantees. And you propose to facilitate this balance. How exactly?" "A joint venture, Sterling Russo Global Initiatives, combining your company's implementation capabilities with my father's diplomatic framework." Sterling's eyebrows rose. "You want me to go into business with Victor again after everything that's happened? I want you both to honor the promises you once made to each other, to my mother, to Sarah." Ella met his gaze steadily. "And I want to lead the initiative, not as my father's daughter or your corporate proxy, but as someone uniquely positioned to bridge both worlds." For a long moment, Sterling simply looked at her, reassessment evident in his expression. "Bold," he said finally, "perhaps even brilliant, but Victor would never agree. He already has in principle, contingent on acceptable terms." Now genuine surprise registered on Sterling's face. "You convinced Victor Russo to consider a joint venture with me in one conversation. Sometimes an outside perspective can cut through decades of assumption and misunderstanding." She smiled slightly. "Isn't that why you wanted to hire me in the first place?" A reluctant smile tugged at Sterling's lips. "Touché." He moved to a sideboard and poured 2 glasses of water, handing one to Ella. "Let's say hypothetically I'm open to this idea. What would the structure look like?" "Sterling Global retains primary implementation and commercialization rights. My father's international framework provides ethical oversight and ensures equitable access in developing regions. The joint initiative navigates the intersection with profit sharing and impact metrics equally weighted in measuring success." Sterling studied her over his glass. "You've given this considerable thought for someone who claimed to have left the diplomatic world behind." "Perhaps I'm finding a new way to engage with it." She set down her glass. "There's one more condition." "Of course there is." "You and my father meet, face to face, before the formal negotiations begin. Clear the air about the past so it doesn't contaminate the future." Sterling's expression hardened. 20 years isn't erased in one conversation, Ella. "I don't expect erasure. I expect two intelligent men to acknowledge that carrying forward a decades-old grievance, based partly on misunderstanding, is neither productive nor worthy of their capabilities. He was silent for a long moment, weighing her words. Then unexpectedly, he laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face, making him appear years younger. "You are every bit as formidable as I suspected," he said, shaking his head in what appeared to be admiration. "Victor taught you well." "My father taught me protocol and strategy," Ella corrected. "Life taught me when rules need to be broken to achieve something worthwhile." Sterling considered her, his expression thoughtful. "And you believe this joint venture is worthwhile?" "I believe it could transform global energy access while establishing a new model for public-private partnership in critical technologies. Yes, I'd call that worthwhile." He nodded slowly. "Where and when for this meeting with Victor?" "Monarchs, tomorrow afternoon before the dinner service. Neutral territory." A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "Thompson will be delighted to host another chapter of the Sterling Russo saga. Actually, he's offered the private dining room and promised complete discretion." "Of course he has." Sterling set down his glass and extended his hand. "Very well, Ms. Russo. I accept your terms contingent on a productive conversation with your father." Ella shook his hand, feeling the weight of the moment. A potential turning point, not just in her own life, but in a conflict that had shaped business and diplomatic relations for decades. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling." As she turned to leave, he called after her. "Ella, one question." When she paused, he continued. "In this joint venture, where do your loyalties lie? With your father's vision, with mine, or somewhere else entirely?" She considered the question carefully. "With the potential of the technology to improve lives, with establishing a precedent that business efficiency and ethical oversight can coexist." And, she added, meeting his gaze directly, "with honoring the friendship that existed before the enmity, the promise my mother asked you both to keep." Something shifted in Sterling's expression, a softening, a recognition that transcended business calculation. "Your mother would be proud of you, you know. She always did see possibilities where others saw only problems." The unexpected personal comment touched Ella deeply. "Thank you. I hope to see you tomorrow at Monarch's." The following afternoon, Ella arrived at Monarch's 30 minutes before the scheduled meeting. Thompson greeted her with the same impeccable courtesy he had always shown, but with a new undertone of respect. "The private dining room is prepared," he informed her, leading the way. "Water, coffee, and tea service as requested. No alcohol." "Thank you, Mr. Thompson." He paused at the door. "If I may, Ms. Russo, what you're attempting today has been 20 years in the making. Whatever the outcome, your willingness to bridge this particular divide is admirable." Before she could respond, Thompson's attention shifted to the main entrance where Victor Russo had just arrived. "Your father is here. I'll escort him back." Minutes later, Victor entered, his diplomatic mask firmly in place. But Ella saw the tension in his shoulders, the slight stiffness in his movements that betrayed his apprehension. "Gabriella," he kissed her cheek formally. "Are you certain about this?" "Yes, more certain than I've been about anything in a long time." He nodded, accepting her conviction. "Then I'll do my best not to disappoint you." They didn't have to wait long. Marcus Sterling arrived precisely on time, his entrance marking a stark contrast to Victor's. Where the diplomat moved with careful restraint, Sterling entered with confident purpose, his energy immediately filling the room. The two men regarded each other across the space that separated them, not just the physical distance, but the gulf of 20 years of bitterness and misunderstanding. "Victor," Sterling spoke first, his voice neutral. "Marcus." Victor's response was equally measured. Ella gestured to the table. "Shall we sit?" The formality of the setting provided structure to what might otherwise have been an impossible encounter. As they settled into their chairs, Ella poured water for each of them, the simple ritual giving everyone a moment to gather their thoughts. "I want to thank you both for agreeing to this meeting," she began. "I know it wasn't an easy decision. For my daughter, I find I can do many things I once thought impossible," Victor said quietly. Sterling's eyes flickered between father and daughter, assessing the relationship with new understanding. "Ella has presented a compelling case for cooperation, despite our history." Victor nodded. "The Qatar technology is too important for personal grievances to interfere." "On that, at least we agree." Sterling leaned forward slightly. though I imagine our visions for implementation remain fundamentally different. Perhaps not as different as you might think, Victor replied. I've reviewed your company's deployment strategy. The efficiency is impressive. Sterling raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the concession. And I've studied your regulatory framework. The ethical considerations are thorough. Ella watched this cautious exchange with growing hope. Neither man was giving ground on substance, but the tone remained respectful, the recognition of each other's expertise a small but significant step. There's something we should address, she said into the tentative detente. The letter Marcus. Sterling's expression tightened. Victor showed you. Yes, and explained that he never read it until recently. Victor cleared his throat. I was in Tehran when Sarah passed Marcus. Complete communications blackout during the hostage crisis. By the time I returned and received your messages, weeks had passed. His voice grew quieter. I should have reached out immediately then, but I assumed it was too late. That my silence had already been interpreted as indifference. Sterling absorbed this, his face unreadable. And my repeated calls to your office never reached me directly. My staff was instructed to screen all personal calls during that period. Security protocol. Victor spread his hands in a gesture of regret. By the time I tried to contact you months later, you refused to speak with me. I thought you had deliberately ignored me during Sarah's illness. Sterling admitted, his voice rough with old pain. After everything else, it seemed the final betrayal. I would never have ignored such a request regardless of our differences. Victor's eyes held Sterling's steadily. Sarah was always kind to Elena, even after everything. She deserved better. A heavy silence fell between them. 2 decades of assumptions of narratives constructed to make sense of perceived wrongs were being dismantled in real time. The Beirut deal, Sterling said finally. I was wrong to go behind your back. The admission visibly startled Victor. You were ambitious. I was perhaps too cautious. You were ethical. I was reckless. Sterling's candor seemed to surprise even himself. Though I'd never admit that to anyone but you two. A ghost of a smile touched Victor's lips. Your secret is safe with us. Something shifted in the atmosphere. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a crack in the wall of resentment that had stood between them for so long. Ella seized the opportunity. The joint venture structure I've proposed that allows each of you to contribute your strengths while mitigating your weaknesses. Market efficiency with ethical oversight. Rapid deployment with equitable access. Sterling nodded slowly. Sterling Russo Global Initiatives. It has a certain symmetry returning to where we began. With the benefit of 20 years of hard-won wisdom, Victor added. They began to discuss specifics then, legal structures, reporting relationships, governance mechanisms. The conversation flowed with increasing ease, each man building on the other's ideas, falling into a rhythm that hinted at the partnership they had once shared. Watching them, Ella felt a profound sense of rightness, as if invisible threads of possibility were being rewoven into something new and stronger. This wasn't just about the Qatar deal anymore. It was about redemption, about honoring promises made long ago, about finding a way forward that acknowledged the past without being imprisoned by it. As the meeting concluded, the three stood to leave. Victor extended his hand to Sterling, a simple gesture laden with meaning. For Elena, he said quietly, and for Sarah. Sterling clasped his hand firmly. For the promise we made. Outside Monarchs, as they prepared to go their separate ways, Sterling turned to Ella. The position is still yours if you want it. Leading the joint initiative. Victor nodded in agreement. No one is better qualified to bridge our two worlds. Ella looked between them. The father she was learning to see as a man with his own complexities, and the former enemy she was beginning to respect despite his flaws. Both powerful in their different spheres, both recognizing something in her that she was only now fully claiming for herself. Yes, she said simply. Accept. As she walked away from Monarchs, Ella felt the weight of her father's Cartier watch in her purse. She had retrieved it from its hiding place before coming today, a talisman of sorts for the challenging conversation ahead. Now, as the spring evening settled over Manhattan, she realized the watch represented something different than she had originally thought. Not just her connection to her father's world, but a reminder that time moved in only one direction, forward. The past could be acknowledged, understood, even reconciled, but never changed. The future, however, remained unwritten. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Ella faced that future with a sense of possibility that was entirely her own creation. The next morning, she would begin building Sterling Russo global initiatives, not as her father's daughter or Sterling's protege, but as Gabriella Russo, a woman who had found her own voice in the language of power.